Hi everyone, Kennedy here from the Ornament Girl, and today I'm going to show you how to create this adorable angel ornament. Welcome to the Ornament Girl, where we love sharing tips, tricks, and patterns for creating beautiful, no-sew quilted ornaments all year long. In this video, I will be showing you how to create the angel ornament in the 2 fabric offset variation, meaning we'll be using 2 different fabrics to create the angel's dress, using one color for this main section and the other color for this cute little angled section at the bottom of her dress. Be sure to check out the angel video library on the Ornament Girl's website to see lots of different fabric arrangement ideas for this angel ornament. This angel tutorial will show you everything you need to know to create your angel ornament, but if you want even more ways to make this pattern, you can purchase this pattern in the Ornament Girls shop. When you purchase the angel pattern, you'll receive a full pattern ebook with step-by-step photos, a whole bunch of printable planning sheets that you can use to plan out your fabric placements, and a special bonus video showing you how to create another angel ornament pattern using different fabric folds. If you're interested in purchasing the pattern ebook and all its bonuses, you can check out the link below the video. Now for this ornament, I will be using an angel ornament kit from the Ornament Girl supply shop to create this adorably spooky Halloween angel. When you purchase an angel kit from the Ornament Girls shop, you'll receive all of the materials you need to create your angel. We love creating these kits to match the seasons, so be sure to check out the supply shop to see which angel ornaments we have in stock today. You can of course also make an angel using your own fabric and materials as well. Below the video we've included a printable supply list that you can use to gather up all of the materials and fabric cuts you'll need to create this ornament. The main supplies that you'll need include a soft foam angel, satin straight pins, fabric cuts in 2 colors. You'll need some sparkle cord or something similar to wrap the head of the angel foam, and then you will also want all of your embellishments. So in this particular kit, I have some feathers and orange cord to make the wings, but you could use ribbon or lots of other embellishments to create her wings. And then you'll also want to gather up beads to cover any raw edges and pins, and a large embellishment to create the angel's halo. Once you have your kit handy or you've gathered materials from your own stash, we can begin creating your 2 fabric offset angel ornament. Now the first thing we're going to do is use your 3-inch square of fabric to cover the bottom of the angel. So you're going to lay this fabric square down with the pattern side facing away from you and center the angel on top of that square. You can leave it on your working surface or flip it over, whichever is easiest for you. And you're going to smooth down all 4 of the corners and pin them in place, keeping those pins about 3/8 of an inch, 1/4 to 3/8 of an inch from the edge of the angel. And when you're pinning down here, you want to angle those pins toward the head, because if you angled them toward the bottom, they could poke through this corner and come out the other side and hurt you, and we definitely don't want that. So you are just going to smooth down all 4 of the corners and pin them that same distance from the edge of the angel. And now we're going to do the same thing for the 4 sides of the square, keeping that pin line straight. And now you're going to work your way around and just add another 1 or 2 pins between each of those existing pins to help hold this square nice and smooth and create a straight pin line. So you're going to smooth the fabric down, add another 1 or 2 pins. It doesn't have to be perfectly smooth. We could have some ripples around the edge because we are going to be covering this area with our next layer of folds. So just work your way around, pinning that square down all the way around the bottom of the angel. Once that bottom square is all pinned down, you can use your fabric scissors to carefully trim away the fabric extending beyond the pins. And now that the bottom of the angel foam is covered, we can start on the first layer of her dress. Now, in your kit or in your fabric cuts that you cut on your own, if you followed the printable supply list, you will have a lot more of one color than the other. The color with fewer pieces is going to make up that smaller angled section of the dress, and the color with more pieces is going to make up the main section of the dress. Now on the bottom layer, I can show you on my finished angel here, on the bottom layer, we're going to use more of that fabric number 1 than we would of the fabric number 2. Now I can show you here on this finished angel, my orange is fabric number 2, which I have less squares of, and for the bottom row, we're actually going to use more of those than we would of fabric number 1, but as we work our way up the dress, we're going to use less and less of fabric number 2 and more of fabric number 1, which we have more pieces of. Each layer of the angel's dress contains about 8 pieces. Now this pattern doesn't require precise measuring, so if you end up with a different number of pieces as you work your way around, that's totally fine. On a lot of my other angels, I've liked to use 6 pieces per row just to keep it a little less bulky, but to fit in the amount of color I want for each of these colors here, I'm going to do 8 pieces on this angel. So we're going to start out with fabric number 2. This is the color that you have less pieces of. And you're going to begin with one of these fabric squares, hold it with the pattern side facing away from you and fold it in half and crease that fold. Now fold it in half the opposite way and crease. So now you've just made a smaller square of fabric, and you're going to hold this diagonally with the raw edges at the top, and you want the 2 folded edges on the left and the 1 folded edge on the right. So I've got the open side on the left, the closed side on the right, and these raw fabric edges at the top. And you can lay this on your ornament, lining up the corners of your folded square with this pin line that we already have going here. And you only need to pin 1 corner in place because we're going to overlap these and use the pin from our next piece to pin down the right corner of this piece. So this is a square fold, and we're going to be using these for almost all of the folds on this ornament. Now with the same fabric color, we're going to do a total of 6 pieces of this color. You're going to fold this into the same square fold. So hold the fabric with the pattern side facing away from you, fold it in half, and then fold it in half the opposite way, and you want to crease those folds. Hold your square on the diagonal with the open side on the left, the closed side on the right, and the raw edges at the top. Now as you move to the right, you are going to overlap this piece on top of the previous piece. Now when I'm only doing 6 pieces, I'll do about 1/4 of an inch overlap, but when I'm doing 8 pieces, it's closer to 3/8 or maybe even 5/8 of an inch there. Like I said, this pattern is really measuring with your heart. You're not doing a lot of precise measuring. So we're going to do this first row, and then if you find that they aren't spaced well enough, you can back up and redo them. But I have my piece overlapping by about 5/8 of an inch there, and then I pinned that left corner in place, which caught the right corner, and again I'm trying to keep this pretty straight with the pin line. Now we're going to do that exact same thing again with the same fabric color. And moving to the right, I'm going to overlap by about the same amount, about 1/2 of an inch, 5/8 of an inch there, and pin that left corner in place. Now repeat that 3 more times so that you have a total of 6 fabric number 2 pieces placed. Now, once you have 6 of those fabric number 2 pieces placed, we're going to place 2 more squares, and those are going to be in fabric number 1. So I'm switching to my other fabric color. Fold your piece in the exact same way and hold it in the exact same way with the 2 open edges on the left, 1 edge on the right, and then the raw edges at the top on the diagonal. And you're going to lay this on top of the previous piece, just like we did before, and pin. And the only difference with this last piece you're going to place, which is the 8th piece of the layer, is that you need to pin down both corners. Now, typically, when I'm placing my final piece on an angel, I like to unpin the first piece and then overlap it on top of this last piece to keep that overlapping pattern consistent. But with the 2 fabric offset variation, I want fabric number 2 to look like it's always sitting underneath fabric number 1 to give that illusion of this underneath section of her dress being a different color. So I don't want the orange overlapping the black. So when I lay this piece down, I'm just going to pin at both the left and the right corners. And if you've done this first row, if you've added 8 pieces and it didn't reach all the way around, you'll want to go back and spread your pieces out a little further. If you couldn't fit 8 pieces, you could just leave it that way, or you could go back and set those pieces closer together. It just takes a little bit of practice to get that correct distance without measuring every time. But just like that, we've completed the first row of the angel's dress, and now we'll move on to row 2. I'm switching back to my fabric number 2 color, and in this row, we're going to use 4 pieces of this color. So you're going to prep your piece in the exact same way, and we're going to offset this to create that diagonal shape on the orange section. So I want to come to the left here, the beginning of my round, and find the point between the first 2 orange pieces, and that's where I'm going to lay my next orange piece. Now, it might not be perfectly centered, because if you perfectly center your piece between these 2 pieces, you aren't going to cover this pin. So it's going to be shifted to the left a little bit, and that's fine. The goal is that you want to cover the pin between those first 2 orange pieces, and you're letting the bottom point sit about a 1/2 inch above the bottom points of the previous round. So I'm not down here lined up with them. I'm moving upward on the angel, moving up by about a 1/2 inch, and covering that pin between the first 2 pieces, the first 2 orange pieces, or whatever color you're using for fabric number 2. Now we're going to prep our next piece, and these are the exact same square folds we were doing on that first layer. And moving to the right, you are going to cover up that very next pin, which will also make your square overlap that first one, and you'll pin the corner in place. And now we're going to do that 3 more times in our fabric number 2 color. I think before I accidentally said there would be 4 orange pieces in this layer, but I actually meant 5. Now, once you've placed 5 pieces of that fabric number 2 color, you can see that the next piece we place is going to touch some of the black fabric or fabric number 1. So I'm going to change to that color. Now, I also want to mention If you cannot perfectly cover every raw edge and pin from the previous layer, that's totally fine. On this particular ornament pattern, we don't worry too much about pins and raw edges showing because we will go back and cover those with beads once the ornament is finished. So you don't have to be too worried about covering every single raw edge and pin. But now I'm just going to continue moving to the right, and I'm going to do 3 pieces of fabric number 1, placing them in the same way. So when I move to the right, I'm going to cover that next pin from the previous layer to the best of your ability. It doesn't have to be perfectly covered every time. It is easier to cover them on these lower layers, so I try to make sure I'm doing that in these first couple layers of the dress, because when I get to the top, I don't want to have to worry about it as much, and I'll save my embellishments for that area most of the time. So I'm just doing my second piece of fabric number 1 here, moving to the right. And then for my third and final piece, which is the 8th piece of the row actually, I am going to pin it down at the left and right corners, just like we did on the first row. And that will keep the offset, the second fabric, underneath that first color on both sides. Now we're going to move up to the next row, and this time we're doing 3 pieces of the fabric number 2. Now when we start these square folds, we are going to skip inward a little bit to create that offset look. When you look at your angel from the front, you are going to have the offset section at the left. So over here where the orange colors start, instead of pinning between those first 2 orange pieces, I'm going to come over to the second 2 orange pieces. That means I'll be able to place 1, 2, 3 pieces in this row, and they'll be shifted toward the front of the angel a little bit. So just to clarify that, here's the first 2 orange pieces from the last layer. They're on the left. I'm going to come between the second and the third orange piece, or the fabric number 2 piece, I should say, because you can use this same layout with lots of different colors and lots of different Ornament Girl kits. So here's those first 2 pieces. I'm coming between piece 2 and 3, moving up by 1/2 of an inch and covering that pin with my new piece and pinning at the left corner. And then I'm going to move to the right using that same color again. And I'm going to come over here to cover this next pin. And look, you can see I have a couple pins sticking out here, and that's totally fine because like I said, we can cover those up with embellishments at the end of the pattern. And as we move our way up the angel, these pieces are going to sit closer together because the foam is much narrower. So you might notice that they're just shifting closer together there. Now I'm going to place my third piece of the same color, covering that next pin, and pinning at the left corner. And now as I move to the right and finish off the next 5 pieces, I'm going to be using fabric number 1. So I'm just going to prep this in the same way. And move to the right, covering that next pin. and pinning it in place. Now you're just going to continue moving to the right using fabric number 1 until you've placed a total of 8 pieces for the layer, which will be 5 pieces of this color. Now, as you can see, when I placed that final piece, I pinned it at the left and right corners. And now as we move up to the 4th row of the dress, I only have 2 pieces of fabric number 2 to place, and I'm going to center those between the 3 pieces from the previous row. So I'm going to fold these in the same way, and then here's 2 fabric number 2 pieces from the previous layer. So I'm going to center these, center that point between them, and pin at the left corner, and then I'm going to place that next piece, moving to the right. And this is where it starts to get a little tricky to cover all the raw edges and pins. And if you can't do it, that's totally fine because we've got plenty of beads to help cover things up. So I placed those final 2 pieces of fabric number 2, and now of course I'm going to switch back to fabric number 1 and move to the right, adding a total of about 6 pieces. If you need to remove 1 piece to make things not so bulky as we move up the foam and it's more narrow, that's totally fine. Again, this ornament doesn't have to be super precise. It's more about enjoying the process, and then we can use embellishments to tidy everything up at the end. But I'm just going to continue working around to create this 4th row of the dress. Now that row 4 is complete, we are going to move on to row 5, and now we only have this color left to use, so you don't have to worry too much about where you start, but you are again just going to place square folds, moving up the ornament and covering the raw edges and pins from the previous layer. Now at this point, the tip of your pieces, the top tip with those raw edges, should be just below the edge between the head and the neck of the angel foam. So if you have way more foam showing there, you might want to move a couple layers up a little bit, and you don't want to bunch it up over the head. So if you need to move this layer down a bit, you can. But I have my pieces sitting just a little bit below that edge on the foam. And now that you're pinning near a more narrow section of the foam, you're going to want to change to angling your pins downward to the bottom so that you don't accidentally pin through this narrow section and poke yourself. So just work your way around placing this 5th layer just like you did with the previous layers. The only difference is that you're just using 1 color now, but you still have the goal of covering any raw edges and pins that you can from the previous layer. Now for this final piece, since we're using all one color, you can decide here if you would rather pin it right on top of that first piece that you placed, or if you want to unpin the left side of that first piece and place your final piece underneath it. So you can fold it out of the way, place that final piece, and then fold that edge back down. It might just keep your pins a little bit more evenly spaced, but that's totally up to you. And if you do that, you're going to need to pin the left edge of the piece you placed and the left edge of the piece you folded back down. And now that we're at the top of the angel, we only have one more layer left to add, but for this 6th layer of her dress, we are changing up to sail folds instead of square folds. So this time when you hold your square of fabric, you are going to hold it diagonally with the pattern side facing away from you and fold it in half so that the top point meets the bottom point and crease that fold. Now fold it in half the opposite way from left to right and crease. So now you have a triangle shape, and you again want to hold your piece with the raw edges at the top, the open side on the left, and the closed side at the right. And you're going to do the same thing, just using the bottom point to cover any raw edges and pins from the previous layer. And then you are this time going to pin the triangle in place at the left and right sides. Now, I think that it's probably best to place your front triangles last. So I'm going to have my angel facing this way with the offset section at the bottom. So I want to place these last couple of triangles at the front last. So I'm going to turn around to the back and place a couple triangles back there first. Pinning at the corners, making sure you're angling those pins down so you don't poke yourself. Now for this top layer, you could place up to 8 pieces to try to cover all of these pins, but it does get pretty crowded, so you'll probably find yourself wanting to place closer to 4 or 5 pieces. And if there's any pins that get left uncovered from the previous layer, that's totally fine. We'll just cover them with some beads. So you're going to prep another piece, holding it diagonally and folding it in half from top to bottom, and then folding it in half the opposite way to make a small triangle. Hold this with the raw edges on the top and 2 folded edges on the left, and you're just going to add those back couple of triangles first. And when you pin, you want to angle your pins down, and you are going to have raw edges at the top, and that's totally fine. And now I'm going to add a couple more triangles to the front, just working on covering up raw edges and pins wherever I can. But again, if they don't all get covered, it's totally fine. And once you've added a handful of sail folds to the top of the ornament there, all of our fabric pieces are complete. You can see I have pins showing here, but I'm not going to worry about it because we'll be able to replace those with beads here soon. And once you have all of those fabric pieces placed, we can now move on to wrapping the angel's head. Now to wrap the angel's head, you are going to need the cord or string that you want to use to create her head, and then you'll also need some glue. So I'm using hot glue here. I find it a little bit easier to work with, but you can also use any other fabric or tacky glue that you like. Everyone will have their own personal preference on what works for them. If you're using hot glue or something else messy, be sure to protect your working surface like I am here. Now, I like to start at the back of the angel, so if I want to take a look and I want to use this as the front, I'm just going to find that back center point and add a tiny dot of glue at the base of the head and secure the end of the cord. Now I like to let this set for a minute so that I know it's nice and secure. And then you are going to wrap your way around the angel, moving up the head. Now for these first couple rows, you really don't even need a ton of glue because the shape of the angel head is keeping it down there toward the bottom. Oops, I don't want any big giant globs. I just want tiny little thin sections of glue to help hold this string in place as I wrap. And you might get a little messy, but you'll be able to pull away all those glue strings when you're finished. You also don't want to push too hard on her head because it can just pop off since the foam is a little bit weak at that corner there. So again, I'm just adding tiny bits of glue and working my way around. If you were using a colored cord, like for example, if I wanted to use orange for this, I would suggest painting the head of the angel so that if any foam does show through, it matches the color that you're using for her head. Since I'm using white here, having the white foam works the best. So again, this can be a little bit tedious. I'm definitely going to speed up the video because it's just the same thing, carefully adding bits of glue and wrapping the string. As you move your way past this center point and the smaller part is toward the top, it can get a little bit more complicated, so you might find yourself wanting more glue to hold the string there. But you don't have to rush through this. You're just going to take your time to make it look as nice and tidy as you can get it. All right, I've reached the point where I'm basically just wrapping in a circle up here at the top. It's flattening out a little bit, and you're just going to keep gluing and laying the cord down right along the previous round. You want to keep it close together and you don't want too many foam gaps showing. Now, when you reach the very top center here, you are just going to continue wrapping in tiny circles until all the foam is covered. You can sort of make a circle and then press it down into the glue there until you've reached the very center, and that center section tends to pop up off the foam for me, so I just like to give it a little bit of time to set there, and then all you need to do is just snip off the extra, and just like that, the angel's head is covered. And now we can move on to the wings and embellishments. So the first embellishment I like to add is the wings, and in this particular Halloween angel kit from the Ornament Girls shop, I have actual feathers to use here and some orange cord. In a lot of other kits, you may have various different ribbons or strings that you can loop and use for the angel wings as well. So with this kit, I'm going to start with my orange cord, whoops, and pin through one end, and you can do this same method with any type of ribbon or string. You're going to pin through one end and then come down maybe about 2 inches and loop that ribbon up and pin through that again. I like to hold it in my fingers like this to keep it equally spaced, but if you're better at getting equal loops, you could just eyeball it. You're going to continue looping and pinning onto that pin And these loops will create the look of angel wings. Usually you can get about 3 loops per side to make it even. I have some extra cord here, so I could have made my loops a little bit bigger, or I'll just trim off the extra so that I don't have a string hanging down. And again, you can do this method with lots of different cords and ribbons. And then you can just pin this to the back center of your angel. So here's where I want the front to be. I'm just going to flip it over so I'm looking at the back center and pin it in place. And then when you flip to look at the front, you can make sure you like the placement of that. And now, since I have some actual feathers I can use here, I'm going to put those together and figure out where I would like them. Arrange them on my little angel here. I like the look that these fluffy pieces give down here. And then I'm going to use some pins to hold this in place too. It might be hard to perfectly catch, so you could also use your glue for this step as well if you wanted. Since those feathers are kind of thin, if you're pinning down here into the thicker part, that would be a little bit easier. But if you want to use your glue to add those feathers, you can do that as well. I'm going to add a dot of glue here, and then add my first feather. And then add another dot of glue. I already unplugged this, so it's struggling to get that glue out, but that's okay. And then add my second feather. And I'm gonna let that set for a little bit. And now that her wings are added, using any embellishments that you'd like, whether you used feather and cord or some ribbon, once her wings are finished, we can now add her halo. Now there's a couple different places you could pin this. You could pin it flat on top of her head. You could pin it upward in the back, or on this angel here, I pinned it to the top, but I used a bead in between so that it looked like it was floating a little bit more. So to change it up for this one, I think I like the look of it sticking up behind her head. So I'm going to position it back there, thread a pin with a bead, and pin it in place. And now all that's left to do is use up the rest of the cute little beads in my kit. So the way I'm going to do that is start by replacing any pins that I can see. You could try to pin right next to them, but what I like to do is pull that pin out, thread it with a bead, and then pin it right back into place. And if some of those raw edges are showing, that's totally fine. Gotta clean up these glue strings here too. The raw edges won't hurt anybody. It is just nice to be able to hide these pin heads a little bit. So again, I'm just pulling that pin out, threading it with a bead, and then returning it to hold that fabric piece in place. And if you run out of pin heads that need covered, you could just add the beads anywhere that you would like. You could also add trim or ribbon around the base of her head if you don't like those raw edges showing at the neckline. But I'm just going to continue working my way around, pulling out any pins that are showing, threading them with an embellishment, and then returning them back into place to hold the fabric pieces down. Now, once I ran out of pin heads that needed covered, I just added the rest of the beads scattered around her dress to add a little bit of glitz and glam. And once all of your embellishments are added, your 2 fabric offset variation angel is complete. I hope you really enjoyed following along in this tutorial with me. I can't wait to see all of the beautiful angels that you create, and be sure to keep an eye on the Ornament Girl shop and the Ornament Girl email list to see all of the brand new angel kits that we release so that you can collect them all. If you have any questions, be sure to let us know in the comments at the bottom of the page, and as always, happy ornamenting.